For years, no one could survive working for the most demanding CEO in the city. Assistants came and went like clockwork, chewed up by impossible deadlines, relentless pressure, and a man whose standards were as sharp as his mind. Then, one morning, a new candidate walked through his door. She wasn't intimidated by his reputation, his empire, or the rules everyone else seemed to crumble under. What happened next would shake the walls of his office, and neither of their lives would ever run on the same schedule again. Hello family, welcome to Storytime with Imzi. Please subscribe and like, it means the world to us. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones, and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. The elevator chimed softly, its polished chrome doors sliding open to reveal the 43rd floor of Vailtech headquarters. The floor no one lingered on unless they had to. The air here felt different, charged, as though ambition and fear had settled into the walls. Sleek glass panels reflected the skyline beyond, and the marble floors were so spotless they seemed almost hostile to scuffed shoes. Somewhere down the hall, a single coffee machine hissed and sighed, producing an espresso that would likely be cold before anyone had time to drink it. At precisely 7:45 a.m., the office was already buzzing. Assistants hurried past each other with folders clutched to their chests like shields. Murmured phone calls carried an undertone of panic, and every now and then, a glance darted toward the frosted glass doors at the far end of the hall. That was Adrian Vale's office. Vailtech's CEO, billionaire, innovator, and in the whispered accounts of former staff, perfectionist to the point of cruelty, had developed an unintended reputation over the past 2 years. No assistant could survive working for him. Some lasted a few weeks, others a few days. The record was 32 days, held by a former Navy officer who left muttering something about preferable combat conditions. The HR department had started calling it the revolving door. Adrian himself never acknowledged this legacy. He didn't need to. The quiet precision with which he dismantled inefficiency was enough to keep the myth alive. He never raised his voice, never lost his composure. Instead, he simply asked questions, and the wrong answer was enough to make a person rethink their entire career path. This morning, he stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows behind his desk, hands in his pockets, his reflection framed by the sprawl of the city below. The light caught in the sharp lines of his charcoal suit, and the deep burgundy tie at his throat looked as deliberate as every other choice in his life. Behind him, Dana from HR hovered in the doorway, clutching a sleek tablet like a lifeline. "Your new assistant is arriving in a few minutes," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Name?" Adrian didn't turn from the window. "Emma Cross." He let the name settle for a moment. Background: administrative lead for Westbrook and Partners, 5 years. Before that, executive coordinator at... "Not the resume," he said, finally glancing over his shoulder. "What do you think?" Dana hesitated. "She's confident." A faint smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth, not amusement, but the recognition of a challenge. "We'll see how long this one lasts." And then the elevator chimed again. Footsteps, steady, unhurried, echoed down the hall. The kind of steps that didn't rush to keep up with the pace of the floor, but set their own rhythm. Somewhere in the open office, a junior analyst murmured, "Is that her?" Dana shifted uneasily. "I'll send her in." Adrian turned back to the city, his voice calm, almost bored. "Do." No one in the building knew it yet, but the revolving door was about to stop spinning. Emma Cross had been in plenty of impressive offices before, but none that seemed to glare back at her. The frosted glass double doors whispered open at her push, revealing a space that was all clean lines and sharp edges. The kind of office where nothing was accidental. A black glass desk gleamed like still water in the center of the room, flanked by a pair of low leather chairs that seemed more sculptural than comfortable. To the right, an abstract painting hung on the wall, bold strokes of deep crimson slashing through a field of silver. And then there was Adrian Vale. He stood at the windows with the city sprawling beneath him, hands in his pockets, posture easy but coiled, like a man accustomed to moving only when he chose, but capable of decisive motion at any moment. His suit was flawless, his tie immaculate, and the faintest shine of a cufflink caught the light. He didn't smile. "Emma Cross." She crossed the room with the kind of calm that came from years of walking into situations where everyone expected you to flinch. Mr. Vale. Adrian, he corrected, though it sounded more like a test than an invitation. Adrian, she said smoothly, without hesitation. He gestured toward one of the chairs but didn't sit himself, still watching her as though she were a problem to be solved. Let's not waste time. Why do you think you can do this job? Emma lowered herself into the seat, crossing one leg over the other. Because I've done harder jobs for people who weren't half as capable. That earned the faintest lift of an eyebrow. Flattery. Observation, she said evenly. His gaze narrowed, not in displeasure but in concentration, as if she'd just moved a chess piece he hadn't anticipated. You've read the description. You know this isn't about fetching coffee or keeping my calendar tidy. This is about making things happen before I have to say them out loud. How fast can you work? As fast as you need. Without mistakes. And when you make one, I learn from it. Immediately. He studied her for a beat too long. Confident. Efficient, she corrected, her tone warm enough to keep it from sounding like a challenge, though it was one. Adrian moved to his desk at last, setting down a sleek black tablet. Tell me something you've done in a past role that would make me believe you. She leaned forward slightly, her voice even. Last year, a partner firm attempted to pull out of a deal worth $30 million at the last minute. Their CEO was already boarding a plane. I had a courier deliver a hard copy of our proposal to his gate, and I convinced him to delay boarding by 10 minutes. He signed on the spot. The company kept the deal, and my boss got all the credit. I was fine with that. The corner of his mouth shifted. Not quite a smile, but something dangerously close. You don't mind being invisible? I mind being ineffective. A long pause. Then Adrian sat back, steepling his fingers. You start Monday. Emma's eyes flicked to the clock on the wall. It's Monday. For the first time, he smiled. Just barely. Then you start now. By 9:07 a.m., Emma was certain of two things. 1, Valetech moved at a speed that should have been illegal. 2, Adrian Vale wasn't exaggerating about the anticipate before I say it part. The desk in front of her was already stacked with files, each marked urgent in neat block letters. 3 monitors displayed a shifting grid of emails, project timelines, and live financial data. Every few minutes, her desk phone lit up like a strobe. Legal needs Adrian to review the patent addendum before the noon meeting, came a clipped voice over the line. Send it through, Emma said, typing as she spoke. I'll get it to him in 5. She ended the call, opened her inbox, and immediately silenced an incoming meeting reminder that would have interrupted Adrian's 9:15 investor briefing. She was still adjusting that schedule when Dana from HR hurried over, a hand pressed to her earpiece. The catering for the board lunch is missing. Missing, Emma repeated, scanning her calendar. They never got the order. Emma was already dialing. Call the caterer. I'll find a backup. 10 minutes. While Dana moved off, Emma secured a new lunch from a restaurant across town, flagged it as a priority delivery, and messaged building security to make sure it cleared reception without delay. By the time she hung up, her cell buzzed. Unknown number. She answered. This is Martin at Skyline Aviation, a man's voice said. Your boss's flight to Boston tonight? The jet is grounded for maintenance. Next available is tomorrow. Emma glanced at the clock, then at Adrian's calendar. Hold the slot, she said. I'll call you back in 3 minutes. She opened her contacts, found a charter service in New Jersey, and within those 3 minutes had a new jet booked and waiting. She updated Adrian's itinerary, rescheduled his driver, and sent confirmation to his phone before he stepped out of his meeting. At exactly 9:32, Adrian emerged from the investor room, scrolling through his messages. Good work on the jet, he said without looking up. Emma almost asked how he knew, but then remembered the subtle network of observation that was Adrian Vale. Of course he knew. The rest of the morning blurred, a last-minute data sheet for the product team, a call to track down a missing signature, a rearranged dinner meeting with a notoriously elusive venture capitalist. She handled each with steady hands and an unshaken voice. It was just past noon when Adrian stopped at her desk. How's the first day? She looked up from her screen, met his eyes, and said simply, manageable. Something flickered in his expression, not surprise, but recalibration. By the time she left that evening, Emma had memorized more about Vailteca's operations than most employees learned in a month. She'd also learned something about Adrian himself. He tested, measured, and pushed, but he noticed everything. And from the way his gaze lingered for half a second as she left, she had the feeling she'd passed the first round. The office was nearly silent after 8 o'clock. The constant murmur of voices, the hum of the printer, the clipped rhythm of shoes against marble, all of it faded as the floor emptied. Most employees headed home by 7, their exhaustion tempered by the relief of surviving another day under the Vailtec pace. Emma didn't leave. Not because she was trying to impress Adrian. She knew better than to think he valued gestures over results, but because the day had been a snarl of moving deadlines, and she preferred to leave things smooth before morning. She'd just finished updating the agenda for tomorrow's board meeting when she heard it. A low sigh, almost swallowed by the quiet. Adrian was still in his office. The door was slightly ajar, and through the gap she saw him leaning over his desk, tie loosened, jacket draped across the back of his chair. The burgundy silk caught a slant of light from the city, glowing faintly. His sleeves were rolled to the elbows, revealing forearms dusted with the faint sheen of someone who'd been working far too long without a break. A large sheet of drafting paper was spread out in front of him. Hand-sketched diagrams of something mechanical, lines and notes scrawled in pen. It looked nothing like the polished presentations he gave in the boardroom. This was raw, messy, unfiltered. Emma knocked lightly on the doorframe. He glanced up, momentarily startled, as though he'd forgotten anyone else was still here. "You're still working?" "I could say the same for you," she replied, stepping inside. His eyes flicked toward the diagrams, then back to her. Old habit. She moved closer, curiosity winning over decorum. "What is it?" He hesitated, then said, "A prototype for a new wearable interface. Haven't decided if it's worth the R&D push." The lines were clean in concept but imperfect in execution. A reminder that even Adrian Vail started with something unfinished. "It's worth looking into," Emma said simply. He studied her for a long moment, as if weighing whether she was humoring him or telling the truth. Most people wouldn't say that without seeing market data. "I'm not most people," she said, and meant it. Something flickered in his gaze. Not warmth, not yet, but the faint acknowledgement of a wall shifting. She turned to leave, but he called after her. "Emma." She paused in the doorway. "Good work today." He didn't say it lightly, and she didn't need to smile to let him know she understood the weight of it. It started with a phone call at 6:42 a.m. Emma was halfway through her first coffee when her cell buzzed. The number flashing across the screen was internal, but the voice on the other end was anything but calm. "Emma, it's Marco from PR. We've got a problem." "What kind of problem?" she asked, already reaching for her laptop. Tech Insider just published detailed specs for the V-Glass. They're calling it Vailteca's secret product. Emma's fingers froze on the keyboard. The V-Glass wasn't supposed to be announced for another 3 months. Only the executive team, key engineers, and Adrian had full access to the specs. She switched to speaker, typing as she spoke. "Send me the link. I'll get Adrian on the line." But when she called his private number, he answered on the first ring. "I know." His voice was steady, but there was steel under it. "Board's already calling. Meet me in my office." 10 minutes. By the time she arrived, the floor was a hornet's nest. PR was scrambling, legal was digging through NDAs, and the product team was whispering in tight circles. Adrian stood in the middle of it all, flanked by 2 department heads, calm in the way that made everyone else more nervous. "Emma," he said without looking up from his phone, "I need every contact you have at Tech Insider. Call them. Don't ask them to take it down, they won't. Ask who gave them the files." She nodded, already dialing. "Marco," Adrian called to the PR director. "Draft a holding statement. 2 paragraphs. Acknowledge nothing, deny nothing. We're reviewing internal security." Emma stepped into the hall to make the calls. She didn't demand, didn't threaten, she negotiated. 10 minutes later, she had a name. She walked back in. It was Holt, junior engineer. Signed NDA 18 months ago. Looks like he got an offer from Apex Systems last week. Adrian's head lifted. A slow nod. Get HR to pull his files. Lock his accounts. Legal can handle the rest. But Emma wasn't finished. We need to change the story. By noon, Adrian's brows rose just slightly. Go on. We control the leak. Frame it as an intentional teaser to gauge market reaction. Put out one high-quality render and a vague statement about testing concepts. Gives us time to regroup, makes Apex look irrelevant, and keeps investors from panicking. For a moment, he just looked at her. The room seemed quieter for it. Then he said, "Do it." By 11:48 a.m., the narrative had shifted. Headlines that morning had screamed Veil Tech in security crisis. By afternoon, they were speculating about a bold new product strategy. At 2 o'clock, Adrian stepped into her office. "You saved us a week of damage control," he said. Emma closed her laptop. "You hired me for that." He regarded her for a moment longer than necessary, as if recalculating something he thought he'd already solved. Then he simply said, "Keep going," and walked away. The V-Glass crisis faded from headlines within the week, but inside Veil Tech, its ripple effects were still felt. Adrian had always kept his inner circle tightly guarded, but now, Emma found herself in meetings she hadn't even known existed. It started subtly. One morning, she arrived to find an extra chair set at the end of the long walnut table in the strategy room, her nameplate placed there without comment. The executives barely glanced at her, but Adrian's quiet sit was all the permission she needed. The conversation was dense, numbers and projections flying across the table, but Emma stayed sharp. When the CFO hesitated over a funding decision, she spoke up. "If you move the marketing spend to Q3 instead of Q2, the revenue spike from V-Glass's launch will cover the shortfall without touching reserves." The room went still. The CFO leaned forward. "That actually works." Adrian didn't say a word. He just moved on to the next item, but the faint twitch at the corner of his mouth told her he'd heard every syllable. Over the next 2 weeks, she was there for more: prototype previews in the design lab, tense investor calls, private dinners with potential partners where she wasn't just taking notes, but speaking, steering, closing gaps in conversation Adrian left for her to fill. One night after such a dinner, they left the Midtown restaurant together. The city was damp from a light rain, the air thick with the smell of asphalt and wet concrete. Adrian's driver pulled up to the curb, but he didn't immediately get in. "You handled peers exceptionally well tonight," he said, his voice low, as if the praise was dangerous to say out loud. Emma smirked. "I thought he was going to choke when I mentioned the European patent filing." "He almost did," Adrian said, a trace of amusement in his eyes. They stood there a moment longer than necessary, the sound of passing cars filling the space between them. Then Adrian opened the car door and gestured for her to enter first. "You should know," he said as she slid in. "Most people in your position never see the things you've seen these past 2 weeks." Emma met his gaze. "Then I guess I'm not most people." The car door shut, but the shift between them stayed, invisible to anyone else, unmistakable to them both. The whispers started quietly, the way whispers always did. A passing comment in the break room. A glance exchanged when she and Adrian stepped off the elevator together. The occasional smirk from someone in the boardroom when she spoke and Adrian didn't interrupt. Emma ignored it. Or at least she told herself she did. Late nights had become common, not just for her, but for them both. What began as emergency scheduling or last-minute contract reviews had turned into strategy sessions that stretched past midnight. They'd order takeout from the Thai place 3 blocks over, sitting side by side at the long conference table, laptops glowing, the rest of the floor swallowed in darkness. Tonight was one of those nights. They were deep into preparing for the V-Glass Investor Summit when Emma leaned over to point at a slide on Adrian's screen. "This chart's too dense. Trim the projections. They only need the 5-year spread, not the whole decade." He glanced at her, one brow slightly raised. "You're starting to think like me. I'll take that as a compliment." "It is. It shouldn't have felt like more than it was. 2 professionals fine-tuning a presentation. But the air felt different." At some point, she realized her chair had drifted closer to his. Close enough that she could see the faint shadow along his jaw, the way his tie had loosened just enough to hint at the long day behind him. Close enough to catch the low warmth in his voice when he asked, "How are you holding up?" "I've had worse days," she said lightly. A pause. "And better?" She didn't answer right away, and his gaze held hers just a beat too long. The space between them seemed suddenly smaller than it had any right to be. She broke it first, pushing back slightly in her chair. "We should finish this before sunrise." "Right," he said, though his tone carried the faintest trace of reluctance. By the time they wrapped, it was past 1 in the morning. He walked her to the elevator, something he'd never done before, and when the doors slid open, he didn't immediately step back. "Good work tonight," he said, his voice low. Emma nodded. "We make a good team." His eyes softened, just for a moment. "We do." And as the elevator doors closed, she realized the line between them was still there, but it was thinner than it had ever been. The offer came on a Thursday afternoon. Emma had just returned from a meeting with the design team when her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She almost ignored it, but something in her gut told her to answer. "Emma Cross?" the voice asked. "Yes. This is Carla Monroe, CEO of Stratus Innovations. I'd like to make you an offer." Stratus was Vailtecha's biggest rival in the wearable tech market, leaner, hungrier, and known for poaching talent with aggressive packages. Carla didn't waste time. Executive Director of Operations. Full creative control, direct line to me, and a salary that will make your accountant smile. You'd start in 2 weeks. It was the kind of offer most people would accept before the call ended. But Emma didn't answer. "I'll need to think about it." When she hung up, she sat back in her chair, staring at the city skyline beyond her window. 2 weeks ago, it would have been simple, a better title, a bigger role. But now, every thought of leaving was tangled with Adrian. She found him later that evening in the strategy room, reviewing numbers. He glanced up, immediately reading something in her face. "What happened?" "Stratus made me an offer." His pen stilled. And it's a good one," she said. "The kind that makes you rethink everything." The air between them tightened. For a moment, Adrian said nothing, just studied her with that sharp, calculating gaze he used in negotiations. But this wasn't a negotiation. "You're considering it," he said finally. "I'd be stupid not to." He set the pen down carefully, as if buying himself a moment. "Emma," he paused, searching for words he didn't usually have to find. "You've changed the way I run this company. You've changed the way he broke off, then exhaled. "If you want to leave for the title or the salary, I can't compete with that. But if you're leaving because you think your work here doesn't matter, you're wrong." Her heart thudded in her chest. "And if I'm leaving for neither of those reasons?" His gaze held hers, unflinching. "Then tell me to stop, and I will. But if you're staying, I won't pretend anymore." The unspoken words between them finally had shape. The line they'd been careful not to cross was right there, and for once it wasn't blurry. Emma's fingers curled against the edge of the table. She could walk away now, to the safer choice, the cleaner lines. But she knew she wouldn't. "I'm staying," she said softly. Something in Adrian's posture eased, but his eyes stayed locked on hers. "Then we have work to do. And other things to talk about." She smiled, not the professional one, but the one she didn't let many people see. "I'm counting on it." And just like that, the revolving door stopped spinning.